我们的身上，就成我们心的强项。中华民族到了最危险的时候，每个人被拍着发出最好的呼声。起来，起来，起来！我们完成一心，冒着敌人的炮火前进，冒着敌人的炮火前进，前进，前进，前进。
That we are living through a period of world crisis is indisputable, the evidence presenting itself with stark clarity. The war in Ukraine rages on, a proxy conflict that exposes the deep fractures within the global order. At the same time, the spectre of war looms ominously over Taiwan, as imperialist interests circle, seeking to maintain their grip on the reins of international power. The United States, in its pursuit of hegemony, issues barely veiled threats to annex Canada and Greenland and considers military intervention in Venezuela, all under the guise of safeguarding democracy, but in reality to secure resources and strategic advantage. Alongside these overt acts of aggression, the capitalist nations are beset by severe internal contradictions. Inflation spirals out of control, and the once mighty industrial base of the West withers, a casualty of decades of profit-driven deindustrialization. Yet these crises are not simply the product of recent events or the actions of individual leaders. Rather, they are the inevitable consequence of long-term historical processes rooted in the capitalist mode of production. At the heart of this crisis lies the critical decline of Western hegemony, a process set in motion by the contradictions inherent in capitalist imperialism. The West, having dominated the globe for centuries through colonial conquest and economic exploitation, now finds its supremacy challenged on multiple fronts. China, having endured a century of humiliation at the hands of imperialist powers, has re-emerged as an economic and political force, recovering its sovereignty and asserting its interests on the world stage. Meanwhile, India's own capitalist development, though marked by profound inequalities, contributes to a shifting global balance. The West's response, outsourcing production, dismantling domestic industry in pursuit of short-term gains, has only hastened its decline, leaving its populations vulnerable to economic shocks and social dislocation. In sum, the present world crisis is not a temporary aberration, but the manifestation of deep-seated contradictions within global capitalism, intensified by the erosion of Western dominance and the rise of new centers of economic power. Only through a clear-eyed analysis of these material forces can we begin to chart a course beyond the impasse of capitalist crisis and imperialist aggression. Over the centuries, Western dominance has unfolded in distinct historical phases. From the 16th to 17th century, the world witnessed Iberian feudal imperialism as Spain and Portugal projected their power across the oceans. In the 18th century came the mercantile struggle between Dutch, British, and French capitalism. Then, from 1815 to 1921, Britain established its dominance through industrial capitalism and empire. The period from 1898 to 1948 brought inter-imperial rivalry, wars, and revolutions. From 1948 to 1991, the socialist challenge rose. European imperialism declined and national liberation movements triumphed. After 1991, the United States sought to revive imperial hegemony. But from 2022 onwards, the world entered a new phase, the crisis of Western hegemony. Under British hegemony, tribute and taxes were primarily collected from South Asia. This was made possible by Britain's victories over France between 1745 and 1815, which secured India and Canada within the British Empire. During this time, the majority of Britain's capital exports were directed toward temperate European settler regions such as Canada, the United States, Argentina, and Australia. Only a minor portion returned to South Asia. As a result, Canada, the United States, Argentina, and Australia experienced rapid capitalist development, well-fed populations, and demographic growth. South Asia, in contrast, remained agrarian, suffering declining living standards and recurring famines. Meanwhile, continental Europe and Japan developed internally funded capitalist economies. British capital exports helped the United States emerge as the next great industrial power, soon to surpass Britain itself. By 1900, the world had multiple centers of industrial capitalism, competing for resources and dominance, and 6 great empires dominated industrial production. First was the United States, followed by Germany, Britain, France, Japan, and Russia. In population, the British Empire ranked first, the Chinese Empire second, then the United States, Russia, and Germany. These powers, industrial giants, and populous empires formed the rival poles of an emerging global conflict. The Russo-Japanese conflict centered on competition to exploit China. Tensions between Britain and Russia emerged over South Asia. In response, the British and Japanese empires formed an alliance, preventing Russia from expanding into India and China. Russia was defeated in 1905. The United States clashed with the Spanish and German empires over Cuba, the Philippines, and Venezuela. In 1898, it seized the Philippines while the German Navy prepared to intervene, even drawing up plans to invade the United States and seize Venezuela. In Africa, Britain and France confronted each other at Fashoda in 1898, an encounter that nearly ignited war. The half-century that followed was marked by wars to redivide global power. By 1949, the industrial centers of 1900 still stood, but Japan, Turkey, Germany, Spain, Austria, and Russia had fallen. Britain and France were bankrupt and deeply indebted to the United States. By 1962, both had lost their empires. The US emerged as the undisputed capitalist hegemon after 5 decades of conflict. The United States owed its success to key material advantages. It possessed the largest industrial population among capitalist nations and enjoyed abundant resources, energy, minerals, and food. Its high capital-to-labor ratio enabled higher productivity, and high wages made automation and mechanization profitable, giving America a decisive edge over Europe and Japan. From 1898 to 1949, continuous conflict forged and tested these advantages, allowing the US to surpass all capitalist rivals. The sustained warfare of that half-century unleashed a revolutionary wave that transformed the world. Russia, China, North Korea, and Eastern Europe broke from the capitalist system. The USSR and the new socialist states formed a global alternative, challenging US dominance. The years between 1898 and 1949 were not only an age of war, but of revolution. In response to these shifts, the United States unified the capitalist world under its financial and military leadership. Its focus was to contain and wear down the Soviet Union, and to suppress national liberation movements across Asia and Africa. After the global upheavals of 1898 to 1949, the United States, now ascendant to command of the capitalist world. Its ruling class aimed to contain the socialist bloc and crush liberation movements threatening imperial control. Thus, the planet divided into 2 irreconcilable camps: capital under the stars and stripes, and labor under the red banner of revolution. Following the Second World War, the world became bipolar, its axes defined by the antagonism between the United States and the Soviet Union. The dollar became the universal equivalent, the world's reserve currency. The US exported machines, technology, and capital, not as charity, but as instruments of domination. Its corporations entrenched themselves in Europe and Asia, extracting profits and ensuring subservience to American monopoly capital. Over time, the export of real capital gave way to financial domination. By the late 1960s, the expenses of the Imperial War in Vietnam and foreign competition from European and Japanese industry pushed America into deficit. Unlike the British Empire of the previous century, the Americans could not disguise their imbalance by means of colonial tribute exacted at gunpoint. The mechanisms of exploitation had assumed subtler yet no less rapacious forms. The secret of this new imperial order lay in the phenomenon of seigniorage, the state's capacity to extract revenue by issuing currency whose nominal value exceeded its metallic or real content. Under the Bretton Woods system, the dollar was nominally convertible into gold at the fixed rate of $35 per ounce. This fiction could be maintained only so long as the quantities of dollars in circulation remained tethered to their nation's gold reserves. Yet the needs of empire know no bounds. By 1971, the American state, in its insatiable drive for domination, had issued dollars far in excess of its global hoard. When French finance capital, sensing the swindle, demanded redemption of its dollar holdings for gold, the United States responded not with restitution, but with repudiation, suspending convertibility and inaugurating a new era of monetary imperialism. In this system, real commodities flowed to the United States, while the world received only paper promises. The dollar's hegemony allowed America to appropriate global surplus value through finance. What was once the explicit tributary mechanism of the British Empire, taxing its colonial possessions in Asia and Africa at gunpoint, was now emulated and transcended by the United States through the subtle apparatus of dollar seigniorage. Post-1971, the American state acquired the unprecedented world historic power to levy tribute upon the entirety of the world economy, financing boundless military expenditures and underwriting the expansion of its imperial apparatus. Under Reagan, the surplus extracted from the global proletariat was marshaled to accelerate the arms race, deliberately bankrupting the Soviet Union, the citadel of socialist resistance. With the collapse of the USSR in 1991, the American bourgeoisie inaugurated an era of unipolar domination, aspiring to a new century of financial and military supremacy, the so-called American century, in which capital reigned unchecked and humanity writhed under its yoke. The dollar system did not simply serve the interests of the American state, but elevated the financial oligarchy to previously unimaginable heights. Through the credit multiplier and the mystifications of modern banking, Wall Street acquired purchasing power exceeding even that of the Treasury itself. As the dollar was enthroned as the universal currency and the United States ran perpetual trade deficits, exporting countries accumulated massive credit balances in American banks. These balances were then deployed to lend to other deficit nations, extracting interest and deepening the spiral of dependency. When countries faltered and could not meet their obligations, the US-controlled IMF and World Bank imposed draconian structural adjustments, a euphemism for the forced transfer of public resources to the voracious maw of American capital. In essence, Wall Street, through the hegemony of the dollar, plundered the world's capitalist assets, while the US Treasury exacted a global tax, transforming the planet into a banker's paradise and a hell for the international working class. Let us turn our gaze now to the curious alchemy wrought by the dollar's ascendancy. Armed with the boundless purchasing power bestowed by its currency monopoly, the United States found new advantage in importing manufactured goods from Asia rather than producing them at home. American industry, once the engine of global production, entered a period of decline, even as the workshops of East and South Asia surged ahead, and the coffers of Middle Eastern states swelled with petrodollar flows. The reversal of fortune was unmistakable. The imperial center hollowed out the periphery, fastened on the spoils of dollar liquidity. How did the world tolerate this peculiar arrangement, in which real wealth flowed westward and paper claims returned east? Here, the deep contradictions of capitalism reveal themselves in stark relief. The system pivots on the circuit MCM, money exchanged for commodities, only to yield a greater sum of money. Such a process demands an ever-expanding ocean of currency, a constant supply of liquidity to lubricate the gears of accumulation. The American trade deficit performed this very function, pumping dollars into the arteries of global commerce. Foreign capitalists, seduced by the mirage of perpetual dollar balances, amassed fortunes denominated not in gold or goods, but in the abstract promises of American finance. This was the Mercantilist Delusion Adam Smith so trenchantly criticized, confusing the accumulation of money for genuine wealth. Yet in the logic of capitalism, the delusion became dogma, and the world acquiesced to the chimera. History History, ever the stern instructor, offers its parallels. Following the defeat of France in 1870, the Hohenzollern monarchy strode across Europe with the swagger of a new master, much as the United States would dominate the globe after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. By 1912, the Kaiser's generals warned that French capital financing Russian industry would soon tip the balance of power irreversibly. The Emperor's response, a desperate gambit to crush France before turning eastward, would cast the die for the Emperor's ruin. A century on, the United States finds itself shadowed by the same dilemma. China, having surpassed America in industrial production and naval construction, looms as the new challenger. The imperial strategy echoes down the years. In 1914, the Kaiser sought to break its weaker foe before confronting the colossus beyond. Today, Washington attempts to subdue Russia, first by sanctions, then by arming Ukraine, with the intention of turning its full might on Beijing. The parallel is ominous. Will this be the final act of the American empire? The world now enters an epoch where revolutionary turmoil feels imminent. Wars, famine, and the clash of nations reveal a system in terminal decline. The centuries-long rule of Western capital faces its reckoning. Alliances fracture. The financial edifice trembles. States lurch between stagnation and revolt. The US ruling class openly prepares for war with China. Nuclear submarines are transferred to Australia. Western industry cannot even replace the losses of its Ukrainian proxy before China enters the fray. China brokers peace between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Oil begins to trade outside the dollar. Saudi Arabia and Iran seek admission to BRICS. De-dollarization forces the Federal Reserve to raise rates, threatening the stability of its own banking system. Political conflict within the United States intensifies. Murmurs of civil war grow. Across France and Israel, mass discontent erupts, a sign of storms to come. In the heartlands of NATO and AUKUS, workers must oppose the war preparations of the US and UK. Their aim is to prolong a dead system of Western domination. This order is driven by a decadent financial oligarchy that has suffocated human progress for half a century. Only through the defeat of this oligarchy, through the united struggle of workers and oppressed peoples, can humanity break free from imperialist exploitation. In the downfall of the parasitic few lies the hope of the many.